Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the January lecture. Can I congratulate you? This is the biggest ever attendance at any of our lectures. The previous record was, I think, 66, which was the November lecture. So, well seen here, RNLI, a porter in Stornoway. And we were hoping to start off with a maroon, but after what's happened in the Playhouse Cinema in 1960, when everybody ran out and the maroon burst about the Playhouse roof, I think it's not a good idea. Anyway, tonight it's not about me, it's about John MacLennan. In his working life, he was the manager of the Labour Exchange and then chief executive of the Port Authority. Did it change during your time, John?
Yes, it did.
Yeah. Was Peel Harbour Commission before that. Anyway, without any further ado, I think you all know John, to see at least. John, the RNLI and your own memories.
Thank you, Malcolm. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And firstly, I should like to thank the Stornoway Historical Society for inviting me to deliver this talk tonight. And also to thank you all for your attendance and interest in the Royal National Lifeboat Institution in general and the Stornoway Lifeboat Station in particular. Whilst I've endeavoured to be as accurate as possible, I would ask you to bear in mind that with the passage of time, perhaps my memory is not as exact as I would wish it to be. Therefore, I should make it clear that the subject matter of the talk tonight is very much from a personal perspective. And I'm not here tonight on behalf of either the RNLI or indeed Stornoway Lifeboat. During the talk, when known, I'll acknowledge the source of the photographs, which aren't my own. I think it's important at the outset, there are two coxswain Malcolm McDonalds associated with the Stornoway Lifeboat. And for the sake of clarity tonight, Malcolm McDonald Sr. I'll refer to as Calla, and his nephew Malcolm, who was latterly coxswain, I'll refer to as Colin, so as to differentiate the two. If I was to speak of Malcolm MacDonald throughout the talk, it might lead to some confusion. My main aim tonight is to try and give you a taste of what's involved in the successful running of the Stornoway Lifeboat Station and to pay tribute to all of those involved in crewing the boats and fundraising since the establishment of our station in 1887, 137 years ago, up until the present time. This isn't intended to be a detailed historical account, and it's inevitable that I will miss out people and events. This isn't intentional. Tonight, my imposter syndrome is very much to the fore, as I know there are others much more competent in matters pertaining to the Stornoway Lifeboat, who perhaps ought to be delivering this talk. So we'll start off with some background information. This is the gentleman that kicked it all off, Sir William Hillary. He's acknowledged to be the founding father of the RNLI, and living as he did in Douglas in the Isle of Man, he saw the treacherous nature of the sea at first hand, having witnessed dozens of shipwrecks around the Manx coast, many involving the loss of life, very similar to what was going on in our own island here. In the early 19th century, there was an average of 1,800 shipwrecks a year around our coasts, and the danger of loss of life through shipwreck, it was actually accepted as the norm. In 1823, Hillary made an impassioned appeal to the nation, petitioning the British Navy, ministers and prominent citizens for the formation of a national institution for the preservation of lives and property from shipwreck. This noble idea fell on deaf ears, mainly because the Admiralty refused to help. But he didn't give up. and instead rebranded as appeal to the more philanthropic members of London society. This time it worked, and importantly, King George IV assured royal patronage, and the Prime Minister of the day agreed to be president. We're coming up to our 200th anniversary. On the 4th of March 1824, we have the founding of the Royal National Institution for the Preservation of Life from Shipwreck. 1838, Grace Darling and her father. They became national celebrities, and they very much focused public attention throughout the British Isles on the saving of lives at sea. It wasn't until the 5th of October 1854 that the institution's name was changed to the Royal National Lifeboat Institution, the RNLI as known today. In 1884, we had the familiar RNLI flag, which I started the thing with. 1887, the first lifeboat, the Isabella, was stationed at Stornoway. Stornoway Lifeboat Station was established. In 1891, we had the first street collections. And again, I mention that because that inspired both wealthy and ordinary people to make voluntary donations and contributions for the provision and maintenance of the National Lifeboat Service. A tradition that very much remains enforced to this day. And I'm quite sure everybody in this chamber tonight has donated and supported the RNLI. 1905, the first powered lifeboat. 1930, the first powered lifeboat capable of 18 knots. I just didn't realise that they were producing lifeboats then. I don't think that one ever came to anything. It was a prototype. 1930, Stornoway Coast Guard station equipped with a receiving wireless set. And it wasn't until 1949 that both Stornoway Lifeboat and Stornoway Coast Guard were equipped with radio, wireless, transmitting and receiving sets. Now for some statistics. There's 238 lifeboat stations around the British Isles and Ireland and the Channel Islands. And interestingly, when the Republic of Ireland was set up in 1921, the RNLI stayed. And to this day, it's the RNLI that run the rescue service right round the Irish coast. There's 349 lifeboats and 108 in the reserve fleet. And now for a very sobering statistic. There are more than 600 names inscribed on the RNLI Memorial at Poole for those who lost their lives on service on lifeboats. The Fraser-Burrell lifeboat alone has lost 13 crew members, and in 1969 the Longhope boat was lost with the loss of 8 people. Just as in Sir William Hillary's vision of almost 200 years ago, the RNLI to this day is made up of a large body of men and women in constant readiness to risk their own lives for the preservation of those whom they have never known or seen, perhaps of another nation, merely because they are fellow creatures in extreme peril. Ordinary men and women carrying out extraordinary deeds. We'll now turn to the local situation and to Stornoway. The history of the RNLI in Stornoway goes back to 1887 and the first pulling lifeboat. Essentially an open boat powered by oars and named the Isabella came on station. She was christened by Lady Matheson at an inauguration ceremony on the 7th of December 1887. This boat did not prove successful, and by 1898 we have the local committee complaining to the RNLI inspector about the efficiency and safety of the Isabella in heavy weather. In 1899, the Honorary Secretary, now known as the Launching Authority, on, I think, the only occasion in the history of this station, he refused to launch the lifeboat after receiving a telegram from Jumping Head that there was a vessel in distress. The reason for the refusal was due, and I quote, the inefficiency of the boat for service in the Munch or at the harbour entrance when canvas had to be relied on as a means of propulsion. Accordingly, in 1899, the committee unanimously called for the provision of a more efficient type of lifeboat. So the first 42 years of this station, from 1887 to 1929, were fraught with difficulties, mostly associated with crewing. In that period, there were 4 pulling and sailing lifeboats like that, which launched only on 11 calls. The Sarah Pilkington was the only one that saved lives in that period. The most striking instance of this difficulty in mustering a crew occurred on a night known to us all, the 1st of January 1919, when the Islair struck the beasts of Holland. When requested to raise a crew by the naval authorities, the coxswain was unable to do so. He tried to round up a crew from ship's line in the harbour, but no crew could be got. My next heading is The Wheels Grind Slowly. Throughout the 1920s, just 100 years ago, the station was under very real thought of closure, mostly due to lack of interest in these pulling and rowing lifeboats. And it was reported the fishermen took not the least interest in crewing the rowing lifeboats, and besides, they were away from home most of the time. In 1920, a request for a motor lifeboat was turned down by the RNLI because of the enormous cost. But the committee, led by Lord Leverhulme's representative, Colonel Lindsay, continued to press every year for change. In 1926, the RNLI relented and included a new motorised boat for Stornoway in the building programme. That's her there. The William and Harriet finally came on station in September 1929. She cost £10,469. That's the equivalent of about 850,000 today. And it was then the station really took off. The William and Harriet was station boat for 25 years until 1954. And she launched on service 77 times and rescued 130 lives. The arrival of the motor lifeboat also saw the appointments of the first regular and reserve coxswains and crews under coxswain James Crockett in 1930, and the formation of that formidable body, the Ladies' Lifeboat Guild, in 1931. The lifeboat service in Stornoway was becoming much closer to the service as we know it today. Stornoway lifeboats have launched on service a total of 1,129 times since the setup of the station, and saved 346 lives and assisted many other people along the way. Interestingly, on that statistic, the present lifeboat, the Tom Sanderson, which came here in 1999, has launched on service over 500 times. And that was a statistic that surprised me when I was researching this. So I'm now going to move on to another heading, the lifeboat family. Mention is often made of the lifeboat family, both locally and nationally. And there is undoubtedly a camaraderie and bond among all lifeboat volunteers and personnel throughout the country. There is a strong tradition throughout the British Isles of specific families being involved with stations. Stornoway is no exception, and the family with the longest such association, covering 3 generations here, is the McDonald family, who of themselves have given 296 years of service to the RNLI. 178 of these years were the men manning the boats, and 118 were the ladies in that family fundraising. Surely that's a truly remarkable record. That's the McDonald family when the Port Authority put in a bench in memory of Calla, and the inscription on it says, Malcolm McDonald, British Empire Medal Coxswain of the Stornoway Lifeboat from 1952 to 72. He joined the crew in 1935 and served as coxswain from 1946 until his appointment as coxswain. He was awarded a bronze medal in 1952, a silver medal in 62, and received the BAM in 1969. That's his medals. That's when he got the freedom of the borough. That's the casket he got when he got the freedom of the borough. And that's his certificate of service when he retired from the lifeboat station. And that is Calla and myself out on a boat. Over the years, Stornoway lifeboat volunteers have been awarded a total of 6 RNLI medals, and 5 of these medals are found in the McDonald family, this locally unique family. Both coxswains, Calla and Callum, have won the RNLI silver and bronze medals, whilst Callum's father, John, also held the bronze medal for their conspicuous courage and gallantry on various services. I'll speak more of these services later. The 6th medal was a bronze medal awarded to John MacLeod, better known as Bolshy, the lifeboat mechanic from 1929 to 1967. And then we have the Campbell family. Coxswain Murty, his brother Kendi, a crewman, and sister Maggie in the Lifeboat Guild. And they've given well over 100 years of service. Presently, it's the Murray family who hold the baton as a family who are involved with the lifeboat. And we have Coxswain D.I. Murray there. His brother Martin John is the engineer, and his brother Ian Andrew and Martin John's son, John Murdo, they've already tallied up 76 years of service to the RNLI. Now, up until 1996, the lifeboat was kept on moorings south of Cuddy Point. That's the James and Margaret Boyd on that moorings. Access was by boarding boat. That's the Sir Max Ayton on the same moorings. And boarding itself could be challenging on a bad night or a bad day. And that image illustrates it well. You have the lifeboat downwind there, but for us to access it in the launch, especially if there was a southerly gale, Callum would have to go up very near the end of number 1 and then turn and run before it to get over to the lifeboat. And often we were soaking wet before we actually reached the boat. That's just coming back from it. Sometimes the harbour froze over, and that image there illustrates it very well. And there was no way a boarding boat would get through that. And at such times, we used to take the boarding boat alongside the Esplanade Quay. The crew were summoned by firing 2 maroons from a mortar which exploded very loudly over the town and could be heard all over the place. During the night hours we were called by telephone, but the coxswain, who was usually first on scene, would fire the maroons. All possible haste was taken to launch, and generally the lifeboat put to sea within 10 to 15 minutes of maroons being fired. A pager system was installed and first used on the 8th of December 1983 to a particularly tragic call-out. When a Cessna aircraft ditched into the sea off Quebec Head, and very sadly 10 people perished in that. And strangely enough, the son of the co-pilot visited me in Maravik last summer, almost 40 years after the incident. And it struck me how raw, and the impact it had on people's lives, and all these years later, how raw it was with them. Now, throughout my time on the lifeboat, I kept a diary of the various calls, and that's just an example of that diary. That's Gavin McKeever, and I think that photo well illustrates the urgency of what he was attending to on that specific day. That's one of our current crew members, and that's him rushing to the boat, obviously in answer to a distress call. We're now coming to some of the services. That's the island of Sular on a poor day and in its entirety. And I've put that red arrow onto it. This is the first service that McDonald did to get the award of a bronze medal. And again, I'm going to read from the Lifeboat records for this. Calla got a bronze medal for this service, and as you can see, Sular is basically it's just a rock out in the middle of nowhere. The 17th of September 1952, the Coast Guard were made aware that 4 crew of the Mayflower were marooned on Sular. Their boat had been hauled clear of the water whilst they were hunting the cuckoos, but subsequently wrecked in a storm, even though it was hauled up clear. The fishery cruiser Muna reached Sular the following day, the 18th of September, but it was too rough to try and land where the men were marooned. At 11 o'clock at night, the William and Harriet left Stornoway, and after a 65-mile passage in a heavy swell with a northwesterly gale, they reached Sular at 7:30 in the morning of the 19th. The weather on arrival was too bad for the lifeboat to enter the confined bay or yaw, and the water was all broken surf. So the lifeboat went to anchor in the lee, close to the cliffs on the south side, both to save fuel and to wait for the weather to moderate. Soon after noon, the wind did ease off, but those of you who are fishermen or seamen in here tonight will know that in an exposed area like that, even when the wind dies, the swell can stay up for days afterwards. Calla decided to enter into that tight yaw. Neither he nor any of the crew had ever been to Sular before. The cove was not even marked on the chart, and he had nothing but the rise and fall of the seas to show him any sunken rocks. On that he relied. But he knew the risk. If the surge had caused the lifeboat to come down on a ledge of rock, the crew would very likely have finished up in the water and have had difficulty getting us ashore. He anchored in 16 feet of water, and again there was a terrific surge running that day, and veered astern towards the shore and the cliffs. The holding of the anchor was poor, and he had to keep using both engines to keep the lifeboat clear of the rocks. He passed a line ashore, and this was made fast. The 4 Nessmen, 2 of whom could not swim, were then hauled with veering lines and the breeches buoy lifebelt, one by one, through the water onto the lifeboat. 20 minutes after entering the cove, the lifeboat left it again. When they recovered the anchor, they had discovered that the fluke, the bit that digs in, it had actually broken off. It was then 1:20 p.m. and at 8:15, 7 hours later, the boat was back in Stornoway. She had been at sea for 22 hours and had enough fuel left in her for only 3 hours. In recognition of his cool and able handling of the boat in those confined and unknown waters and excellent navigation, Coxswain Calla McDonald was awarded the RNLI Bronze Medal. And this bit really amuses me. The institution also made to him and each member of his crew a special reward of £1, in addition to the reward of £4.15. An ordinary man carrying out an extraordinary deed. That was the last call of the William and Harriet to the SS Etna of Stockholm. She hit Skerry and there was 25 people aboard, including 2 females, which they rescued. And the boat actually sank. When they sent out a salvage vessel the next day, it was gone. And the next one I have will be well known locally to the Vela, which sank on the 6th of January 1957 with the loss of 5 lives, and the lifeboat searched the area and recovered the casualties. And the next one we have is another medal service, the Mamie, on the 31st of January 1962. It left Stornoway in a severe south-southwesterly gale and broke down just inside the lighthouse and was driven onto the Skerwar rocks. 1 man and 1 woman were saved by the lifeboat. This was a particularly arduous and challenging service. Ultimately, both Coxswain Calla and his brother Johnny left the lifeboat in the hands of John MacLeod, the mechanic, and clambered over a dinghy they had borrowed off HMS Malcolm, which was anchored in the loch. They clambered over that. The 2 people that were still on the Skerwar, they weren't responding to the instructions that were been given to them to grasp lifelines and whatnot. And in the end, both Calla and Johnny actually went onto the rock and grabbed them and dragged them back onto the lifeboat. By this time, the lifeboat had a fouled propeller with a net and was touching the bottom. For this service, Coxswain Calla McDonald was awarded the silver medal and the bronze medal to both his brother John McDonald and to the engineer John MacLeod. And that's a picture of all these guys. From left to right, we have, well, obviously Calla at the front getting his citation and whatnot from Lord Saltoun. John MacLeod, Bolshe, Murdo Campbell, he was next door to me on Warwick Glen. And then Calla's brother Johnny. I'm not sure who the next guy is. I have a feeling it was a boy called Cannon. I have a feeling it's his father, but I'm not sure. The next guy is MacAngus, who was a fisherman here. Next guy is William MacDonald, and then Lord Saltoun. And then again, that's Calla's vellums. And it says, in recognition of his courage, initiative and determination, when the lifeboat under his command rescued 2 of the crew of the motor fishing vessel Mamie of Stornoway, which had drifted onto the rocks off Enochlet Point in a south-southwesterly storm and very rough sea on the night of the 31st of January 1962. That's Johnny's. That was the Norna shore up in Loch Shell, and basically they just stood by that until a salvage vessel came. That's an interesting photo. That's one of George Finney Smith's photos. That's just off Sober Island. Horrendous day. That trawler, when he picked his anchor, it had a trawl warp in it which went into the propeller and disabled her. And you can see the lifeboat in the swell there. The next one I have here is the Stassa, which was a timber ship that sank in Rodel Bay. And if you look closely at that picture, you can see that there's a poor Harrisman to the left, and he's quite clearly got tangled up in this raft of timber, and he's trying his best to row away from it, but it's following him. And as was said in Harris, there was many's a hen grateful for the Stassa. There was a few hen sheds built. And it was also said that it was the captain's wife that was on the wheel when it hit Rainish Point. I found that photo of her on the internet the other night. This is the yacht Aeolian, which was owned by Dr. Spears. And it was ashore in a hurricane of wind, as you can see there. And it was the 28th of September 1969. I was actually sitting on the end of the pier in a car with my mother that day. And the car was really shaking violently. And we watched this lifeboat going out the loch, and it was disappearing as it was passing Arnish. And I only found out recently when I was speaking with Colin and his sister that soon after the lifeboat left Stornoway, the radio gear on the lifeboat was carried away. So there was no communication with the lifeboat. And the families for quite some time, they just didn't know what was going on. And it took the lifeboat 5 hours to travel the 30 miles that day to Loch Seaforth due to the severe weather conditions. At 12:45 a.m, the lifeboat towed the yacht clear, and they arrived back at Stornoway at 5 a.m. Colin McDonald was by this time the full-time mechanic and 23 years of age. I asked him last week which call throughout his lifeboat career stood out most in his memory. I expected him to say one of the services where he won a medal, but he said that was the one that stood out most in his memory. Now, this is another timber ship, Kaiserkracht, coming to more recent times. And these photos are from the Hewson family. And we went to that one. It was northeast of Chimpin Head and northwesterly gale. And we were with him all day and escorted him in. Just to try and lighten things a little bit. When we got in, 2 of the crew members went aboard the boat, and I think it was a Russian skipper. And with great ceremony, the Russian skipper said, that is a bottle of whiskey for the lifeboat crew. And one of the boys' faces dropped. His jaw dropped, and he said, well, he said, Captain, that's very kind of you, but there are 7 of us. And we got a bottle of whiskey each that day. This was another unusual rescue. Well, a bit of humour in this one too. The 18th of July 1974, we had to go to the Shants, and we rescued 4 adults, 3 children, 7 cats and 2 dogs. But what's not clear in that is there was also 4 goats. And Colin said, I am not taking goats on the lifeboat. There's enough grass on the Shants for them to eat, and he wouldn't take them. I was probably the youngest guy on the crew at that time, and I was put into the small after cabin. I don't know if I should be telling this one, but I will anyway. I was put into the small after cabin to look after these ladies and gentlemen, and 3 children, 7 cats and 2 dogs. And one of the women vomited on the dog, and the dog then shook itself. And I left the cabin. Dear me. The Diamond Trader, that was another one. I haven't pictures of it. It hit the old beacon coming in, and then it went ashore on Good Island. And we Irish skippers said to us the next day, well, he had the Coast Guard blue lights, he had the lifeboat blue light, ambulances, fire engines, the whole lot. Well, he said, this is a really good place to go ashore. He says, all that people coming to my help. He says, we were three days ashore under a cliff on the west side of Ireland, and all we had for 3 days looking at us was a ram. And that night, when we hauled the hook of the lifeboat after towing him off, it was full of steel trawler warps. And myself and Callum with an axe similar to that, and I hasten to add that is not Callum's axe. I saw that lifeboat on the Clyde last year, and it reminded me. And between the two of us, it's the only time I ever saw the axe being used in anger on the lifeboat. Between the two of us, we parted the steel hawser using the axe. And this one I'm entitled to a favourite customer. It was a small boat missing up Loch Shell on the 9th of September 1976, and there was an elderly man missing. And the equinoctial gales, a fine morning, and it blew up horrendously. And we went down there and searched the area, and we were on the point of returning home. We found no trace of him. And 2 of us were instructed. I think it was George Finlay and myself. We were instructed to go out and take in the searchlight, which on these boats was dismountable. And we put it on for one last time, and here's the guy in front of us in the searchlight. And we went over with the lifeboat, and he asked us, were we fishing? He was a bit confused. And one of the boys had to jump down into the small boat and actually prise his hands. His hands were locked onto the oars. Anyway, we got him aboard the lifeboat, and I said to him, would you like some hot soup? Oh, no, he said, my stomach is droll. Would you take some? No, my stomach. Will you take a glass of brandy? You're blooming right, and all, he says. Or words to that effect. And, well, the brandy did what brandy, I suppose, is supposed to do, and it revived him. And he was wanting then to go up for it to show the lifeboat coxswain how to get into Lemroy. It was an outcome we didn't expect, and thank God for it. Now, this is the hull trawler Chanella. She went aground just after midnight on the 29th of September 1980, and we launched at 12 minutes past midnight. And at just after 1 in the morning, the Coast Guard actually instructed them not to abandon ship. They had put the life rafts, they had inflated them, and they were talking about abandoning ship. We arrived there at 19 minutes past 3. And I'm just going to read, this is out of the lifeboat records, they're not my words. The situation was both difficult and dangerous, as coxswain McDonald made a very cautious approach to the casualty. His intention was to bring the lifeboat portside alongside the pilot ladder, which had been rigged on the Chanella starboard side 30 feet from her stern, but heavy seas breaking around the casualty slewed the lifeboat stern around dangerously, close to the rocks. So, feeling the way the lifeboat wanted to head, coxswain McDonald decided to turn the lifeboat short around and come alongside starboard side too. Although he had little more than the length of his own boat in which to manoeuvre, the coxswain, making full use of his engines, successfully executed this turn and managed to bring the starboard shoulder of the lifeboat alongside the pilot ladder. Then, Displaying superb seamanship, he maintained this position for about 40 minutes, while the 29 survivors disembarked. It was a hazardous operation, with the lifeboat rising and falling 9 to 12 feet in the swell and breaking seas around the Chanella stern. Assistant Mechanic George Finney-Smith, Emergency Mechanic John MacLennan and crew member Kenneth I. McDonald were stationed forward, while crew member Malcolm McLean escorted the survivors to the cabins. Many of the survivors had to be pulled to safety from the pilot ladder, and with a rapid rise and fall, frequently both survivor and lifeboatmen were thrown bodily to the deck. Fortunately, no one was injured. Just after the sixth man had been safely transferred, a Sea King arrived and helped greatly by lighting up the vessel. Up to that time, we were working in darkness. At 10 minutes past 4, the lifeboat informed Stornoway Coast Guard that all 29 survivors were safely on board and that their expected time of arrival in Stornoway would be 7:30. Chanella's crew, 10 in the forward cabin and 15 in the aft cabin, and 4 in the wheelhouse, were made as comfortable as possible. Coxswain McDonald remained on the wheel throughout the entire service. The return passage, which took about 3.5 hours, was made before the southerly gale, which was still blowing up to force 9. Maintaining course was both difficult and arduous in the rough following sea. Heavy following swell, and with the increased weight now aboard, slowing down the lifeboat's response to the helm. There was no lightening of the heavily overcast sky, and frequent rain squalls continued to reduce visibility. For this service, the silver medal was awarded to the coxswain Colum MacDonald, and the thanks of the institution on vellum to the rest of the crew. Now I'm going to try and add my own thoughts of that night. Colum MacDonald was 34 years of age at the time of this call, having been appointed coxswain mechanic only a short year before it. He is a man who vehemently dislikes being in focus or the subject of attention. He shuns publicity. He's on record as saying he was only doing his job that night, and he'd be the first to say that he couldn't have done it without the aid of a competent crew. Well, that might be true. But what is undoubtedly true is that there was not another man on that boat that night that had the combined courage and skills, boat handling skills, of Colum MacDonald. I've often been asked if I've ever been frightened on the lifeboat, and my answer has always been a resounding no. We always knew, all of us on that boat, we knew that with Colum in command, we were in exceedingly safe hands at all times, and importantly, under all conditions. That's the Chanella crew. That's us, along with Lord Gough, who donated the Hugh William Wyke and Gough, the lifeboat that carried out that rescue. Wee side story about Lord Gough. We were coming home one time with the lifeboat, and we were staying in a guest house in Portree. And as we were leaving the following morning, Colum and I had taken all the suitcases up to the top of a steep brae when he shouted, "John, Colum, come back here, you haven't signed the visitor's book." So with great flourish, we went back, and as you all know, up here in the realm signs his name, Gough Strathpeffer, and beneath it is Burley Stornoway. Now, also for that Chanella rescue, Colin got the Maud Smith Award for the most outstanding rescue in the British Isles that year, and he truly deserved it. And that's his silver and bronze medals. That next photo is of the butterflies, and I always think of the words of a poem when I see that photo. Cradled in this crook of sea, she is the last land, nothing more all the way to Canada, and winds that scream of Newfoundland. And the first time I ever went round that point was in the Hugh William Viscount Gulf on the 2nd of December 1980 to a vessel called the Borgen. And it was the only time with that lifeboat, the propellers on the Hugh William Viscount Gulf were inward turning propellers in tunnels actually. And going round the butt that night, she was airborne and the engines lost the water and she screamed. And that's what we were going to. And that boat had broken down off Gallan Head and had been drifting for quite some time before the lifeboat was called. We had hoped to get her before she went ashore, but a rescue seeking helicopter came from Lossiemouth and got them. And the helicopter took 10 minutes to get back to Stornoway. We took 5 hours. And just as an aside, really, we were at Sular on the 2nd of September 1981, and I must be one of the few guys that spent 12 quid at Sular. We asked the Nest people, I hope there's no Nest people in here tonight. We asked the Nest people if we could have some gugas, and they said yes, they're 4 quid each. I think better not say anything more about that. That's another unusual call. 7th of January 1982, the Irish workforce stranded on account of severe snow, and we took about 70 people back to Stornoway that night. That's a photo of the beasts of Holland on a bad day. It's an eerie photo. I'm seeing a face in that photo. And that's it again. And then we come to another medal service, of which Colin was coxswain, the Westward. And as you can see in that photo, it was literally in a hurricane of wind. It was force 12. And again, I'm just going to read from the Lifeboat Journal here. Crabber swamped in force 12. Winds, coxswain mechanic Mark McDonald of Stornoway has been awarded the institution's bronze medal for a service in which the Stornoway lifeboat rescued 2 men from a crabber which was being swamped in hurricane force 12 winds on the 13th of February 1989. In spite of a 15-foot swell, driving spray and rain, Les 5 Point, the Divisional Inspector of Lifeboats for Scotland, said at a station whose services are frequently called upon in very bad weather, it is apparent that these were the worst conditions ever experienced by any of the crew. Coxswain McDonald showed outstanding gallantry and a very high standard of seamanship. His leadership was also outstanding, inspiring his men to place themselves in a position of danger on the foredeck, totally relying on his judgment to keep them from injury. And there are people in the room tonight who were on that service. Alec Murray, Robert Hewson and myself were up forward. And the wind was so severe that day that we were having to turn it back to actually get a deep breath. And if ever the lifeboat saved 2 lives, it was that particular day. And the boat wasn't seen again, it sank. it vanished. I don't know if you can actually see the lifeboat in that. But that's how the sea was just blown flat that day. And that's the westward crew, with the exception of Alec Murray, Scotch. Well, I don't know if that seagull just realised what he was sitting on. It was a mine that was drifting down the Munch, and I can't remember how long we were at. We were at quite a while as the bomb disposal team came. This was another mine on the Comrade, and it was live. And the boys on the Comrade thought the best thing to do with it was to spray it with a hose all day till the bomb disposal came. This one is 28 men on a lawnmower. We rescued 28 guys off that Klondiker, which subsequently came off the rock, and the Agate tried to tow it to Stornoway. When we saw the lawnmower coming down, I think you were at the bottom of the ladder that day, John. And the Russian crew weren't understanding either plain English or even colourful English when told what to do with their lawnmower. But there's a lawnmower out there lying at the bottom of the Munch. And that's the ship in her final. She sank off Quebec Head, I think to the great relief of the harbour master at Stornoway, who was worried that it might sink in the fairway, which was a rare possibility. That's another yacht that Callum was given the thanks of the RNLI on Vellum. We towed that yacht for 50 miles through 25-foot seas and a severe gale on the 12th of September 1992. And we were 20 hours at sea. That photo was taken I took that photo just off Babel. I'm showing you this just to show the power of the sea. I took that photo at North Rona. We had been up on the lifeboat on the Friday night. I was fortunate enough to hitch a lift and a helicopter back up there the following Monday, and the boat was set on fire accidentally, actually. There's that ship at the time. That's her 10 years later. That's her 15 years later, and that's gone now. The sea has totally removed the whole lot. And it did the same with that one on Scalthby, the Gulf Star. That's Sir Tom Sanderson. And she was 65 miles northwest of the Butt of Lewis. And that's an incredibly long shout on a bad night. I think that's one of the furthest out calls the lifeboat has possibly done. Now, we don't want to miss this lot out. The Ladies' Lifeboat Guild. I was asked recently, what's the difference between the old Ladies' Lifeboat Guild and the present one? That's quite a difficult question to answer. I said, well, the present one have signed the Geneva Convention and the duty prisoners. But seriously, the Guild, it's an essential part of lifeboating throughout the British Isles. It's incredible the work that these mostly ladies do. I'm calling them the Guild, although I believe they now have a fancy name, but I've asked several of them, including my wife, who's been 35 years a Guild member, what the name of it is, and none of them know. They still call themselves the Guild. And annually, these ladies raise in excess of £30,000 a year through their tireless activities. That's the ones that do take the prisoners. And the shop is an important part of it. That's some of our lifeboat personnel, and as you can see, a lot of young faces there. The old order changeth. There you are, there's East Blanellen. That's our granddaughter Matilda putting money in. That guy walked right round the British Isles and raised a tremendous amount of money. More fundraising. Now, there are specific people, individuals, who raise incredible sums, and that's one of them, Jane McKeever. Sadly, her partner he lost his life in a shipping accident near Stornoway. And that lady has devoted incredible energy and time, and she's raised well over £20,000 for the lifeboat. This is another guy, Colin S. MacLeod. And when I spoke to him recently, he was at lengths to say that it's not just him, he's part of that team. Well, all I know is he's the guy that swam the Munch for the lifeboat. And, well, I don't know if we should say too much about him, but he did cycle to Carloway and back. And much to, I think, everybody's amazement, £19,500 was donated. I would be the first to say that I did not raise that money for the lifeboat. 650 people raised that money for the lifeboat. It was incredible how well it was supported. Other things, there's Captain Donald Smith. The boys have laid a wreath on the 100th anniversary of the ILR. Again, Remembrance Service. George Finlay Smith. Now, his son has served on the lifeboat as second coxswain, and his grandson is now on the lifeboat. And I must apologise. Earlier on, I totally lost the space. There are photos on this of all the coxswains and deputy coxswains, some of whom are here tonight. That was one of the first coxswains, Donald MacLeod, and as I said, Captain Donald Smith's great-grandfather. So that was the next coxswain, Malcolm Chisholm. I think that's Kenny Chisholm's grandfather. And then we have Calla, McDonald, BEM, up to 1971. Ian McLean, Ian McLean, he was coxswain from 71 to 79. And then Callum. After Callum came Neil MacLeod for a year, and then Murty Campbell for, I can't remember how many years quite. Murty, how many years were you coxswain? And then Tony was coxswain 2016 and 17, but he was second coxswain from 2005 till then. And then that's our present coxswain, D.I. Murray. Ernie Hewson and Callum MacLean, myself. Froggy, who remembers Froggy? And who remembers that pair? That's my own Wellams. In terms of lifeboat families, I think I should give my own extending family I mentioned. That's our son-in-law, D.K., and he's already served for 10 years. And our daughter-in-law has been involved with the lifeboat down in Leverborough, as is our son. And my wife, Ishbel, has been on the guild, so there's quite a lot of year service there too. Maybe an ex-coxswain, that's our grandson.
Thank you. We just have time for one or two questions. Has anybody got any questions they would like to?
When was the lifeboat shed used? The launch where that used to be?
That's a good question, Ian, and it's one I cannot answer. I think that, Texie, you might know, when did the lifeboat moved to the slipway at Shell Street, Ian McKeever's. Probably about now. I think the first lifeboat station at the back of Bullna Creek Street, is that the one you're talking about?
Where Medlock is today, you know, the old...
Yeah,
With what? With what is it?
with Medlocks is to.
Yeah. Well, the first station was actually at the back of am I right? Of Bullna Creek Street.
Yeah,
Was that a Coast Guard building?
yeah, it's a Coast Guard building,
Yeah.
John.
Okay, the first lifeboat station I picked up cost £1,000. So that actually goes back to 1887 then.
Yeah, there's a photo of the Isabella inside
Uh-huh.
that building. Now, it might not have been 1887, but very shortly afterwards. Any other questions? Yes?
Where did the Chanella go aground?
Scaring Mill, 27 miles south of Stornoway, near the north end of Skye.
It was on the Comet Rock.
Well, it was near the Comet Rock.
An interesting fact that the Chanella was, she was salvaged and saved in the Falklands War.
Yes?
And finally she was broken up after going and fight in Argentina.
We could actually smell the Chanella a good hour before we reached her. She was double bottomed and the fuel was in the double bottom and she ruptured the double bottom and all the fuel came out of it. So we were actually smelling the diesel. The diesel was blowing up wind towards us. So we could actually smell the diesel. And the last thing any of us expected was to see the Chanella sailing into Stornoway the next day. But she did come off and, as Malcolm said, she was salvaged.
One last question. Anybody's got anything?
When you speak of the lobster boat you went out for,
The westward.
westward, Paul Daly, who was the DI later on, ex-Royal Navy, he was on an aircraft carrier going down the Moose at the time, and it was flowing 30 knots across 130 miles an hour across the flight.
Yes, I had heard that, yeah.
That was some recipe.
Incredible. And he never, the two boats never touched.
Nobody wants to have anything back.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the guy that should be sitting here tonight telling the stories, not this king.
Well, for those who go down to the sea in ships,
Yeah.
thank God they've got the RNLI and Coast Guard behind them. Thank you all for coming along. Okay, thank you very much for coming along.
I'm done.
Where did you come from? Where did you come from?
I'm watching.
Who are you with?
Mom.
Probably caused John much confusion by you also named Malcolm McDonald.
What do you think of all these people?